Maybe you're like me and you hate all things politics. But today we have to talk about them, at least in a school setting. If you've ever worked in a job, especially in a place of business, then you have actually experienced workplace politics. You might have done your best to avoid them, especially if you were a less senior employee. But you may not have realized that you were actually always a part of it. Either you were someone who had the power or knowledge to make things happen, or you were a pawn that a more assertive person used to reach their goal. Sounds harsh, but that's just the reality. And now that you're in a career that you may be in for the long haul, it's important to learn how to navigate school politics, even if you don't want anything to do with them. Because simply being passive about it could be the difference between loving your job and, frankly, getting screwed. So I'm going to cover how to survive school politics so that you can actually love the school that you teach at. If information like this is right up your alley, then be sure to subscribe because honestly, I post sporadically. And if you want to be notified about when a valuable video like this goes up on YouTube, then the best way you can do that is to subscribe. So just like in regular national politics, in school politics, it involves around different groups and their power dynamics. So some key stakeholders involved are the district that you work in, the school, administrators, teachers, administrative staff, counselors, parents, and of course, students. I'm also missing some other school staff in there, but a lot of times these are quote unquote the power players. And obviously each group has a different priority. For example, a lot of times for a big school district like the one that I teach in, they are of course concerned about serving this community, but they also have to think about things like fiscal responsibility and using taxpayer money, getting federal money, looking like a good district to attract more people to come here so that we can get more of that federal money. And then when you trickle down to, say, the schools, that's also a similar concern in terms of like fiscal responsibility and just making the school look good so it makes the district look good. But also we want to pull in a lot of students so that we can get that money. We call it the ADA money. And then principals, of course, they want to look good running the school. They want to make sure that the school runs smoothly, that there are fewer parent complaints. And if a principal is maybe trying to work up their way to work at the district level, then they're going to do things that make them look good. So that's going to be their priority. And then we have the teachers, you know what I mean. And so it's important to understand and to really be cognizant of the different priorities of all of the power players within a school environment. Understanding this will help you navigate the school politics more effectively because as you are talking to these different people at these different levels, you're going to have to frame your message according to what their priorities and what their ultimate goals are. For example, let's say that you want a particular teaching assignment because it's your favorite grade. Well, your principal might not care that it's your favorite grade. The district might not care that it's your favorite grade. What really matters to them is how does it affect their end goal? Also important to recognize within the structure is favoritism and, sometimes even nepotism, because that will also affect you in the long run. So for example, if you are a favorite of your principal or even the district, then more opportunities are going to be available to you, which seems obvious. And on the flip side, if you are someone who isn't a favorite, or maybe you decide that you're someone who wants to fly under the radar, then things like teaching assignments, classrooms, resources, funding, things like that may not be as available to you. So if you've been teaching a while, then this is all obvious. If you're new, it may not seem as obvious because you just haven't had any experience with this, but it's just good to know and be aware. So this goes along with understanding the school culture in your particular school. After I got myself settled into a new school, I would want to understand the culture and sort of those unwritten rules. For example, you might be surprised by how little power your principal might have. They may actually just be a puppet for the district. They may just be implementing any kind of initiatives that the district wants, and they don't really have any say, and they're just basically a manager. Whereas in some other schools, principals have a lot of power in terms of hiring and firing and spending money. So it's up to you to figure that out when you get to your new school. I've seen schools where counselors have an outsized influence on decision making. They can actually determine teaching assignments sometimes, or who gets which types of classes or students. It was just really surprising to me to hear, and actually in some cases experience, just how much power counselors have, especially because of their working relationship with the principal. In other schools, the principal's secretary is actually a gatekeeper and can determine whether or not the principal even is aware of your concerns. And in certain communities, the PTA can have a lot of influence, especially because they do so much fundraising and they can actually have power in terms of how money is spent, or even have influence on things like events, policies, and other aspects of school life. So it's important to learn about all of this. And one of the best ways to do that is to observe and talk to people. And of course, something that we hate to hear, build relationships. A lot of times when we talk about building relationships, it's someone telling us that we need to build relationships with students, which is just so obvious and sometimes insulting to hear. But you also have to build relationships with other adults. And if anything, I think that sometimes working with the adults is a lot harder than working with the students. So you want to build positive relationships with your colleagues and administrators and the other staff that work in the school. Definitely the custodians. I'm going to tell you right now, building good relationships with a custodian that cleans your room is key. You want that stinky thing out of your room, or you want them to take care of that mouse that's hiding under your desk, you want to be nice to them. So basically, you need to leverage these relationships when problems arise. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be fake, but it's nice to have people who you can lean on. And of course, they're going to want to lean on you. And that's just part of the give and take of being a good colleague. It's nice to have people who are in your corner to advocate for you, especially when decisions are being made about you and when things get tough. So it's really important to learn about who the key players are, as I mentioned earlier, so that you can know who you need to get past, especially if there are certain gatekeepers or certain people who really have a lot of influence in your school. And a lot of that is through building relationships. This means that you're going to have to show genuine interest in others. It seems so simple, but I know people who just like to talk about themselves. That's not really going to help you build relationships with other people if you're always trying to find a way to talk about yourself. I'd also participate in activities. For example, if there's a special event or luncheon that's going on, then attend. If a teacher is throwing a baby or bridal shower for one of your colleagues, attend. Like maybe you're not that type of person who likes to socialize a lot. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not. I'm more of an introvert. I'm kind of boring. I'm a homebody. But if they're doing something at school and it's just like during your lunchtime or maybe for a little bit after school, it's really not going to kill you to go. That really goes far in terms of building relationships with people and also offering to help when you can. For example, one of my colleagues was having a baby and it was right before one of our breaks and no one had thought about throwing her a baby shower because she was a newer teacher. And I am not someone who likes to entertain other people, or I don't like to have parties or dinners or anything like that. I don't mind going out and meeting with people, but I'm just not that person. But I pulled it together and decided that she needed to have a baby shower, that she should have one because pretty much every other pregnant mother in our school has had one. And just because she's new, I didn't want her to feel left out. So I organized with all of the other people who are good at that kind of stuff, and we threw her a really nice baby shower. And so I'm building relationships with all of these other people. I don't necessarily hang out with any of them outside of school, but it makes me feel good to do that for someone. And I know that in the long run, it's good in terms of the school politics. And trust me, as someone who's more introverted, it's exhausting to do these types of social things. I prefer to eat lunch alone just because I need that time to turn my brain off. But I definitely think in the beginning, especially when you're a newer teacher, it's important to try to eat lunch with your colleagues and build those alliances and to really listen and learn. That way, you know who you need to be strategic with, because someday they could really help you in a pinch. And it could be the difference between wanting to stay at your school and just leave teaching altogether. However, we also have to navigate cliques and other groups. And you've probably experienced this either being part of one or unfortunately on the outside of one. These cannot be avoided, and sometimes it really sucks. When I was teaching band, I didn't really have like a group that I hung out with because I taught an elective and the core teachers kind of hung out with their subject matter colleagues, and also my classroom was really far away. And it wasn't until I made friends with one of the English teachers and she just dragged me to the lunchroom, and it was so eye-opening for me. But also I knew that I wasn't part of the clique, and it was kind of awkward at first until I started to make more friends. But part of at least being friendly with people, whether or not you're in the clique, it really helps in terms of knowing who are the decision makers or who has like the principal's ear or the counselor's ear. But I know it's really hard to break into one. There could be a lot of reasons why you can't break into one. And I definitely know that ageism plays a huge part. I hate to say that, and it sucks. But, you know, people of similar age and interests, they just tend to gravitate towards each other. You might not even care about being in one or even really want to be in one of these cliques. I'm just saying that it can help. It can help in terms of forming allies. And it was hard when I switched schools after being at one school for a really long time because everybody already had their established cliques. But I just found that just being friendly to people and being genuinely interested in what is going on in their life, or being genuinely interested when they're sharing something and just trying to get to know my other colleagues, it went really far in terms of forming alliances. And again, you're gonna need those, trust me. Now, if you've been getting value out of this so far, or if it's in any way been insightful, please be sure to hit that like button so that the YouTube algorithm will give this video some love. Because right now, YouTube pretty much just loves clickbait and angry teachers who hate teaching, which I'm never gonna do. So you really support the channel but just by simply hitting that like button. All of this relationship building that you've been doing will help you leverage for success. Now, let's say that you want to teach a particular grade. Maybe you're stuck in 4th grade because that's the only grade that they had open when you applied, but you were hoping for kindergarten. Then you want to identify who are the decision makers, who actually has an influence on the various teaching assignments. A lot of times it's not just the principal who's making these decisions. For example, in my school, yes, it's the principal, but it's also department heads and it's also counselors. So who's in charge and who can you start having the conversations with ahead of time so that you can plant that seed? This doesn't work if you haven't built any relationships though. And then when you build your case, you want to frame it in a way that is going to help that person who you're speaking to reach their goal. For example, if you're trying to teach Math 8 and you currently teach 7th grade math, you're going to want to talk to the math department head and try to figure out what their end goal is when they're recommending who teaches what. Sometimes they see that one grade just is not working for them and that maybe they need to switch to another grade. And so they're just trying to make it so that everyone is placed somewhere where they can do the most good and do the least damage. So how can you fit into that? How can you help them out? If you see that they're trying to meet a need and they're stuck, you could bring up your strengths and how you would be a really good fit in that role. But I definitely wouldn't throw your other colleagues under the bus because that's gonna bite you in the butt later on. They're probably gonna find out. And it might be a series of different conversations with different decision makers, framing it from, again, their goals and needs that will eventually get you to what it is that you want. You just gotta be patient. Like, navigating school politics can really take time, and you might have to start planting that seed early on in the year. Now, sometimes we have to take one for the team. It's kind of that I'll scratch your back and then you scratch mine type of a deal. So you might have to volunteer for maybe a less desirable committee, or maybe for 1 year you take a teaching assignment that isn't ideal, but you can have that conversation of, well, I know that so-and-so is going to be on leave this year, so I'll take that position for the year, but then I would love for the following year to be teaching this. That could really help out your principal figure out what to do just for this next school year. And that'll really go far later on in terms of when they're making the decisions for the year after that. It just demonstrates your commitment to the school and just really builds goodwill with your administrator and possibly your colleagues. And of course, when the opportunity arises, you get to cash in on that goodwill. This actually worked for me because we had a first year teacher who had been traveling classrooms, and that's really rough when you're a first year teacher. Like, you want to have your own room. You're really excited to like decorate and do things like that. And I felt really bad for them. And so what I did is I actually gave up my classroom and I became the traveling teacher. I knew that doing this wouldn't be too tough because I mean, I'm established. I can teach anywhere in any classroom, honestly, especially because we are mainly online. The kids have their iPads, so it wasn't that big of a deal to me. But I also knew that I would use this later on. And so then that new teacher took my classroom and was able to decorate and fill the bookshelves with books that they had acquired, and they really loved it, and they just got to be in one spot. And I traveled only for 1 year. And then the following year, a better and nicer classroom in a better area opened up. And because I had taken one for the team, my principal is more than happy to give that one to me. Now, you may have done all of this relationship building and leveraging, but conflicts are gonna arise. You obviously can't avoid that in any workplace. And this is when you'll really see the power of politics come into play, because you're going to see different factions and it can get ugly. There'll be alliances, possible backstabbing, people throwing each other under the bus. It's like this huge episode of Survivor or Squid Games. In this case, if you were not directly involved, I encourage you, especially as a newer teacher, to stay neutral. You are Switzerland. I would avoid taking sides as much as possible. Like, be supportive of your team, your allies, the people that you've created these relationships with. But remember that as a newer teacher, you are being watched by the powers that be. Until you have tenure or some kind of seniority, if you're really vocal about the side that you pick, that could bite you in the butt later on. I mean, it sucks, but it could be your job on the line. So yes, be emotionally supportive to the people that are in your team, but at the same time, I definitely wouldn't do anything that's going to make administration mad. In the end, school politics suck, and all we want to do is just focus on our students, and I get that. However, we also have to think about ourselves and our well-being, especially our mental and emotional well-being. A lot of that depends on things like our teaching assignment, our classroom resources, you know what I mean. And to get the most ideal teaching environment for you, understanding and leveraging school politics is really going to go a long way. I know you don't want to have to do this. It can feel gross because you're like, I don't want to have to play the game. But the people who don't play the game and who just want to fly under the radar, they just kind of get whatever's left over. They get forgotten, they get passed over, they get pushed around. It's that teacher who might get bumped to a different grade every single year because they haven't leveraged any relationships. You might think that the person who's the most vocal and who's a squeaky wheel and gets really indignant about it gets what they want, but a lot of times it's the people who have taken the time to patiently work on relationships that in the end are happiest, that really get what serves them the best. And honestly, when we're happy, our students are happy too, because they can feed off of our positive energy. But when you hate your teaching assignment, you hate your classroom, you hate everything that's going on in your school, your kids feel that too, and they react in a certain way. So while it may feel gross to do all of this political stuff, in the end, it just helps you like teaching more and stay in the career. So remember, as a newer teacher or maybe just new to a school, just be observant of your school's culture, build relationships with your colleagues, administrators, and even parents. These allies can help you advocate for your needs and your students' success. Remember that professionalism and data-driven requests go a really long way. And don't let politics distract you. Just keep your passion for teaching your students at the forefront of your mind. Now, if school politics have gotten you down and you need a mental day off, be sure to click on this video next, which shows you how to effectively plan for an absence.